Hey guys, Drew Spark Adventures here. Here are 10 things to consider before deciding to be a gig worker full time. Let's begin. First up, I want to talk about financial instability. We got variable income week to week, wear and tear on your car, tip baiting, and of course, you got to think about your phone plans. Variable income week to week is always going to be a big factor. Of course, you got to think about your slow times and your busy times. That will change your month to month and even your annually earnings. So that's a big deal. Wear and tear on your car. Of course, you're putting a lot of miles on your car. You're ruining your tires a lot faster. Your insurance generally is probably going to be higher because, of course, you're a bigger risk in terms of insurance purposes. You got oil changes and a lot of other maintenance you got to put on your car. So, another thing about it is tip baiting. A lot of the apps, unfortunately, encourage kind of tip baiting. Walmart Spark gives them 24 hours to take away their tip. Uber gives 1 hour. I don't think DoorDash gives any time for tip baiting. There, of course, are other apps, but these are the three main ones that I talk about on my channel, or at least you've seen on my channel. I know Uber Eats isn't really a big thing on my channel because I don't have an Uber Eats, but it's supposedly coming this December, so we'll be seeing that shortly here. And of course, we got phone plans. If you do not have unlimited data because you're just doing this part time and it's really not affecting you, you're gonna need unlimited data. It's just a no brainer. So that while it's not a financial instability thing, it definitely is going to raise your, your income versus expenses a little bit. So keep that in mind. All right, let's continue. Next up, I want to talk about budgeting. You got to start looking at budgeting. You got to look at your needs versus your wants. And of course, since you're an independent contractor and you don't have a W 2 anymore, you got to look at the fact that you need to set taxes aside. Generally, the rule of thumb is 20 to 30%. Of course, most people lean towards the 30%. I just kind of do right in the middle of 25% setting aside for taxes. If I have a little extra, at the end that I got to pay, then it is what it is. But generally, from what I've seen, it's generally about 20 to 25%. Like I said, don't take my word for it. You gotta, do it based off of what you're making in terms of that, and you might need to go more towards that 30%. But from what I've seen with all the deductions you can get, it's generally somewhere between 20 and 25% at the end of the year. But yeah, talking about the needs and the wants, going back up to that real quick, you really got to start looking at, do I really need this or do I want this kind of thing? Is it a necessity to live or do I just want it because I enjoy it? So I've had to cut back on, energy drinks here and there because of the fact that I've had to, sometimes budget differently. So, all right, let's continue on to number three. Number three, market demand. Do you know your busy times? Do you know your slow times? If you want to be a full time gig worker, now granted, you don't have to be available 24/7, but honestly, with this job, if you want to be full time, you kind of have to be available 24/7 because a Monday this week could be different from a Monday before, or a Monday next week, or the same exact Monday a year from now. It could be completely different. You could make 300 bucks in one day, and then the next day you make 50 bucks in the same amount of time. It just happens. You got to know your busy times and your slow times depending on seasonal changes, what time of day it is, stuff like that. I put in multi app here as well, just because you really, if you're doing gig work full time, the likelihood of you being able to do this full time without multi-apping is just like not likely. Now, I'm pretty lucky in my zone because Spark, it pretty much does supplement me the most part, but I do put in DoorDash every once in a while when Walmart is slow. So you got to keep in mind your market demand. Is it your zone or relatively, close zones within like 30 minutes of each other? Do you have enough demand in any of those zones around to where you can consider going full time? So keep that in mind. All right, let's continue on to number four. All right, next up, we got job frustrations. Is this job too repetitive? Is it too much work? Is it not enough work? Like, you got to keep in mind, you need to be able to stimulate your brain. Is your brain getting too overstimulated when doing this job? Do you find this job really boring doing the same thing over and over again? While, yes, technically, day in and day out, you have different, like, you know, things you need to grocery shop for or you're going to different houses to drop off. It really is just the same task over and over again. And then, of course, if it's slow, in certain periods of times, do you find yourself not working enough and you get really bored and you go home and you don't work for the rest of the day? Well, that's going to come back to your financial instability you won't be able to make enough money to make ends meet. So that's a big problem there. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about going full time as a gig worker. So next up, we got number 5. We got potential issues towards your health and safety. We got the physical issues here, which are, heavy items. You got stairs to deal with, whether you got bad knees or you're old, whatever it may be. You got some sort of physical problem with heavy items or stairs. Then we got the weather slash yards, of course, heat exhaustion with the bad temp weather. And then, of course, you got rain, and then when we get into the winter months, if you're in the Midwest mostly, some other parts of the thing, but Midwest here especially is generally pretty crazy with snow that creates ice on the sidewalks. And then, of course, in the summertime, if they have unkept yards and you have to go to the back door and they don't have a sidewalk, you might have to like step in some of their holes in their yard, or dog poop or whatever it may be. So you got to keep that in mind. That brings me into animals. Animals are always a big thing. I put animals and not pets specifically because of the fact of I've seen chickens, I've seen dogs, I've seen cats, I've seen horses, I've seen a lot of different animals in this thing. So you got to keep that in mind to your physical health, and even like the physical like exterior health to your car. So you got to keep that in mind when you're thinking about it. Now we move on to the mental health things, of course. You got to keep in mind this job, you will, if you decide to go full time, there is no way that you will avoid burnout. You just will have burnout, but you got to have the mental capacity to be able to overcome the burnout and keep going. Just because otherwise that brings us back to instability. You won't be able to keep up. Also, customer service. People would think, delivering food or groceries, you wouldn't have to deal with a lot of customer service. But honestly, I'd say you'd have to deal with more customer service when it comes to doing jobs like this, just due to the sheer fact of talking to customers while you're shopping for their orders, talking to employees while you're picking up people's food, or talking to employees while you're shopping for people's orders as well. You got to be ready for the patience I have on here of like dealing with crabby customers, employees that, aren't very helpful, or, very crowded in stores like that. You got to keep that in mind. Can you handle those stressful situations and have the patience to power through them? Lastly, of course, we have safety. Uh, are your neighborhoods, good in the dark? Are they, do you feel safe when you're delivering in the dark? Do you have a reliable car that you're driving that you can, safely get from point A to B and then back to point A again, or, to point C if you're delivering food and you go to a different restaurant? I mean, you can always do it in the daytime, but if you're looking at full time, you never know what your hours are going to look like. And a lot of times you're probably going to be working in the dark. Keep in mind, during the winter time, it's going to get a lot darker, a lot faster. So you got to keep that in mind when you're looking at doing gig work full time. So that's all I got for potential issues towards health and safety. So let's move on to number 6. Number 6, we got work life balance. Of course, you got flexible hours, but you got irregular hours. You got to keep in mind that, at the bottom there, I got working more than a W 2. It is very possible that you can work more than 40 hours in 1 week just to make your goal. But, it does, give you the flexible hours to be able to work more than a W 2 if you want and crush the goal of a W 2. I know a lot of W 2s who don't like approve overtime, and you don't get to, have the ability to. The one problem is, of course, you don't get overtime pay and stuff like that, but you get to work more hours if you wish and get paid more as long as your, of course, zone is in demand. You got to maintain financial stability, but you also got to have a life. You gotta, you got to be able to talk with friends, talk to your significant other, family, whatever that may be. Do something, a hobby. Don't spend your life 24/7 just doing work. Because if you do that, trust me, you'll burn out a lot faster and you'll want to give up a lot faster. I've had a burnout last a whole week before, and just really, I mean, I'll still work, but I just, the whole time, my mental is just shot and I just don't want to be out working. So you got to keep in mind, keep that work life balance. Got to be able to work, but not overkill yourself, and make it so that you literally just don't want to do the job at all. Because while this job is really easy, the repetitive stuff and having to deal with so much customer service and dealing with customers all day long, it can really get to you. So you gotta, find that fine line in between work life balance. So gotta keep that in mind. Let's move on to number 7. Personal discipline. This is a big one. Huge, absolutely huge. You got to remember that you are not in a W-2. You are not working for someone else. So you got to have motivation. It's up to you. You cannot be lazy when it comes to this job. You must understand that, yes, if you have made the money for, the week and you're good to go, fine. You want to be lazy and you don't want to work. I've had plenty of times where I've been able to make the goal that I need to make in 30 hours and just be like, you know what? I'm not really feeling it, so I don't really want to work. So I don't. But you got to keep in mind, if you work those 30 hours again next week and you're not hitting your goal, you need to motivate yourself to get out there and make the money that you need to make, because no one can push you unless you have family or friends that are really awesome and they push you that way. But there is no boss. You will not get fired technically by not working. It just won't happen because it is independent contracting. So you are the one who gets to decide whether or not you are out there making money or not. This is a big thing. I can tell you right now, I've lacked motivation before in a week and just been like, I really don't want to. Luckily, I have a supportive girlfriend behind me and family, of course, that, push me through and say, no, Drew, you got to work and make that money. So, got to keep that in mind. If you are all alone by yourself, you got to do it. You got to get out there and make that money. So, keep that in mind for sure. All right, let's move on to number 8. Next up, we got job security. When it comes to gig work, there is no job security whatsoever. It doesn't matter how many multi apps you are doing, there is never job security. You got deactivation, you got demand low, or your zone is oversaturated, which is more of what generally it is. It's more oversaturation than demand is low. But some zones there is demand being pretty low. The app you are using disappears. For example, Spark isn't gone, but they have started offering in-home delivery, which is Walmart employee based. So you got to keep that in mind that, who knows, maybe they decide that they get rid of it. Now, granted, I don't think so. Because I don't believe that there are many people, or like, I don't think there would ever be 100% of the people who'd be like, yes, I want delivery and I want people to come into my house and deliver it. But you got to keep in mind, those are things that are very possible. Or, for example, I watched a video one day that they were starting to do W2 DoorDash or something, which, that's getting rid of the app. And I heard the W2 is paying really poorly. So you also have to keep in mind, like I said at the top there, deactivation. You could get deactivated for no reason. You could, for just absolutely no reason, some employee lies, customer lies, whatever have you. You have to be ready to back yourself up onto something else, because if you can't maintain your income because of any of these reasons here, unfortunately, we just don't have job security like a W-2 has. So, gotta keep that in mind. All right, let's move on to number 9. Next up, we got benefits and insurance. You're not a W-2 worker. You don't have benefits and insurance like you do as an independent contractor. You got to keep in mind health insurance. Guess what? You're independent, no PTO. So you got to be ready to work all the time, every day, basically, if you want to maintain sometimes. So you can't take days off unless you know you're making that money, which is the one like real big downside, in my opinion, is having no PTO. Some days you're just like, man, if only I could make that money but not have to work. It definitely feels bad sometimes when you can't. But you can take days off, whereas some, W-2 workers would have to work because they are required to work. So it is a double-edged sword when it comes to doing this job, but you just won't have PTO. Retirement, you got to keep in mind you really need to save up for retirement, especially at my age, or younger or even older. You don't get matches like a lot of companies do, or even setting up retirement for you. Even if they don't match you, they set up retirement for you and they just take it out of your check. You got to remember to make a little cushion there and put some away for retirement, because you don't want to be working until you're 80 and pass away. So you got to keep that in mind. You just won't get any of these benefits because you're not working a W-2. So you got to make sure you get health insurance, put away for retirement. If you technically want to make more money in one week so that you have PTO in your mind, you could do it that way, where you're like, well, I already hit my goal, but I'll make a little bit more this week so that next week I can take like an extra day off. You can look at it that way of like, I can use gig work as working extra and maybe taking another day or two off the next week or possibly later down the road. you'll just never have the actual paid time off. You'll just have, time off instead. So, all right, guys, let's move on to number 10. We're almost done. All right, last thing I want to talk about is goals. 1 year or less is kind of like your short term goals. 1 to 5 years is kind of like your mid range goals. And then, of course, you got 5 to 10 years, which is your long term goals. You really got to think about what some of your goals are. You obviously don't need to spread out your whole life and be like, oh, this is what I really want to do with my whole life. But you really need some goals. Like I said, if you don't have job security, what can you back yourself up on in 1 year or 1 to 5 years? Can you make sure that you're good to go in 1 to 5 years or 5 to 10 years even? Do you see yourself still doing gig work full time, or is this just a means to end while you work on something else so it gives you flexibility? Like, do you want to go back to college while you work gig work so that you can do that, but it gives you so much flexibility that you can then later go to a different career? You guys got to keep in mind these goals. You got to have something, at least something, whether that is like making more income, doing a lot more full time, which is what I'm doing currently in terms of, we got the challenge going of 80,000 in 1 year. You got to have some sort of goal, at least in one of these categories. Obviously, it'd be ideal to have multiple in all of these categories, but at least, have some short term goal for sure. And then, put one or two in the next two categories as well. So these are the 10 things I wanted to talk about. They're not in any particular order. I kind of tried to put it in like, the most important down to the least important kind of thing. But I don't really particularly think that they're in any specific order. But these are things you got to think about when you're a full time worker. Obviously, you don't want to think about it 24/7. Otherwise, that'll lead to burnout slash stress, anxiety, all those bad things. But these are things that really need to have a hold in the back of your mind every once in a while. You need to sit down. You need to budget. You need to figure out, am I making enough? Do I need to make more? What's the plan in a year? Do I have enough to put away for retirement? Am I getting frustrated doing this job? Stuff like that. So these are really just good things to always be thinking about. So I hope this really helped a lot of people. I personally don't, obviously, like I said, think about these all the time, but these are like 10 things that are just in the back of my mind every once in a while. And I really think that if you want to be a full time worker, it really depends on your market, really, really does. I would say that if you want to work more than a W 2, sometimes you could probably make any market work, but some markets you basically will have to work like you're working two jobs in order to make ends meet. So I would never recommend that. But in my market, I'm pretty lucky and I can do what I do and make YouTube videos for you guys. And I really appreciate every single one of you. This is just a big helpful thanks for getting us to 900. I actually started making this before we hit 900, but by the time I had finished this, we're actually at 904 of this recording. So I need 96 more and then we hit monetization. So I really hope this helped you guys in learning what is in the mind of a full time gig worker. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Stay safe, stay hungry, and until I see you guys again, we'll see you later.